If you have not watched or do not recall my album of the year list for 2023, well, that's probably okay, cause that video was honestly pretty hot garbage. The bad news is this one is probably not going to be any better. Long story short, there was a lot of stuff to talk about for 2023 album of the year because 2023 was a very good year for music. 2024, however, is in a little bit of a different position. Namely, I don't actively recall it anywhere near as fondly as last year, even though there's still a ton of albums to talk about. In fact, I decided to let my list get even bigger this year than last, which is really surprising to me. Thank God for you and for me, I decided to simplify the structure of the list this time around. Instead of keeping only my top 10 albums, then having 10 honorable mentions, plus 10 more honorable mentions to those honorable mentions, which was a really silly thing for me to do by the way, I have made a top 20 albums this year with 10 honorable mentions for simplicity. Even so, let me outline the structure of this list for you. Part 1 will be the honorable mentions, 3 singles, 3 EPs, and 10 albums, which I feel like are worth giving a shout and which nearly made their respective lists, but ultimately did not, obviously. Part 2 will cover my top 5 singles of the year. Bear in mind, these will be my favorite non-album singles, so as not to be confused with a general favorite songs list, which I do not think I'd be capable of constructing without much deeper tracking of my listening. For clarification, non-album singles for this year means that singles for 2024 albums ahead of release are ineligible, while singles for albums coming in 2025 are fair game. Part 3 will be the first half of the ranking proper. The first 10 albums, ranks 20 through 11, which stood out to me as being quality and very nearly top 10 worthy, or that I would have liked to see on the top 10, but which were just beaten out by other records. Part 4 will take a moment to discuss my top 5 EPs of the year. Part 5 will cover the actual and complete top 10 albums of 2024, in my opinion. But now, as we have a lot to get through, let's actually jump into Part 1. Whiplash by Architects. Whiplash is to this point the third single for Architects' upcoming album. I think it is the most predictable of the singles so far. As such, it's not my favorite. I think I like Seeing Red more personally, but it definitely reminded me of the hype for the new album. Paralyzed by Memphis May Fire. Memphis May Fire is a weird band for me in that I'm not actually super familiar with them. I adore a couple songs from their last album, and a couple of the singles I've heard from their upcoming record in 2025 have been equally phenomenal. Paralyzed is my favorite of them. Brave New World by Starset. Starset has also released about 4 singles over the past several months, presumably also including a 2025 album release. Of these singles, which have generally been going a musical direction I've wanted Starset to go for the last couple album cycles, Brave New World is easily my favorite. Alt metal embracing metalcore tendencies is totally my thing, and this song has become my favorite from the band entire as a result. Echo Chamber by Horizon Fall. The first of 2 cheap selections because they're written by buddies, my fellow Music Mania mod, Tony, is part of this EP. He's the drummer. If you enjoy alt metal but also like more uncleans in your music than alt metal typically does, this release will be for you. These guys have more songs coming for a second EP, or maybe to complete an album at some point soonish, when they can get more studio time and production money, and I'm looking forward to that. Let the Dark Crawl by Never Stops Breaking. The second of these 2 cheap picks, my buddy Cameron released a number of singles for this album/EP in 2023 before having issues with being ghosted by his producer or post-production people. I forget the exact problem. In fact, one of the singles ended up as an honorable mention in the previous list. Either way, it seemed like this record would not come out at all, but he did manage to do it, albeit in the form of a couple remixes for past singles, and the new tracks basically being demos. If you like the early 2000s era alt metal, maybe with a quasi-grunge flair now and again, this EP is for you. Volume 1 to 3 by The Plot in You. Since I didn't want to pick between these 3 EPs for the actual top 5 EPs later, and because I have no idea if these guys are going to combine these volumes into a full album later, like Atreyu did in 2023, I decided to include these short releases separately, or rather combined, here. I know after volumes 1 to 3 that I've been sleeping on The Plot in You, and I need to fix that. The Black by Imminence. The Black is a huge step forward for Imminence. It's an evolution on their style and formula that clearly worked for a ton of people, as the band really started getting huge attention through the singles and finally the release of the full album. I liked The Black, but I can't say it was quite top 10 worthy, nor did it resonate with me as much as it did for others. Really good, hence the mention, but also feels as much like an obligatory mention as it is actually worthy of being here. Things Are Different Now by Rain City Drive. If you like Dayseeker's flavor of sad boy sort of core for the last couple album cycles, Rain City Drive's new album has a lot of that energy. While, again, it didn't resonate with me the way I would have liked, it has huge potential to mean something more to me in different circumstances, such as the circumstances when Dayseeker's Sleep Talk finally clicked for me. Death, an Anthology by Enterprise Earth. I understand some of the criticisms of Death, an Anthology, and while there are moments that still take me aback at times, mostly in the vocal department, aka the most controversial part of this album, I think the musicality of the final product is absolutely worth mentioning. In particular, the last couple tracks are standout amongst the whole year. Shining by Swallow the Sun. Melodeath isn't a genre I am the most knowledgeable in, particularly when certain bands are a little bit more unique within it. Swallow the Sun I discovered through, of course, their iconic 2009 release on account of one of my brothers. This new album is one that I definitely have to spend time with, as I think it'll quickly become one of my favorite Melodeath releases as a whole. If you like the melodious side of the genre and have an interest in evocative vocals, this is a good one to check out. Carnal by Nothing More. My awkward confession is that I have not listened to a full Nothing More album until Carnal. Lucky for me, Carnal is a great place to go. The heavies on here are surprising for an alt-metal band, and the otherwise experimental tracks are all kind of a vibe, even if maybe they don't all work. I should check out more from these guys, but I keep forgetting to. Hope in Hell by Our Hollow, Our Home. It is a shame that this band has gone through the turmoil that they have. In 2023, all members except for Tobias left, and shortly before the release of this album, basically the same thing happened, leading to the dissolution of the group, as far as I'm aware. I liked Hope in Hell a good bit, but it is nowhere near the levels that the last couple albums rest. In Moment in Memory is one of my top 10 albums of all time, for example, and Hope in Hell, unfortunately, could only ever hope to achieve something similar. It's good, but I confess a little disappointing too, and wrapped in the context of the band's situation, it's hard to really enjoy it. Demons by Alleviate. I honestly don't even know what to say about Demons. This record has a huge variety of sound in the metalcore genre, ranging from what I Prevail might sound like if they were heavier, to having the best Feels Real songs I've heard all year. This record is great. I recommend it for sure, if you love emotionally poignant and relatable topics and themes in your core, like I often do. Omni by The Browning. The previous The Browning album was a massive disappointment to me as a result of weirdly terrible production/post-production. Well, maybe those problems got ironed out, but I haven't listened to End of Existence since to find out. Omni, fortunately, for its own sake, does not have such major issues. It's a little shorter than I'd like, as the Browning releases have historically been 40+ minutes rather than Omni's sub 30-minute runtime, but it is good and also sees a little bit more outright core influence than previous records too, which is cool. Posthuman Next Gen by Bring Me the Horizon. For some reason, there seem to be just as many people hating on the second entry in the Posthuman album series by Bring Me the Horizon as there are people praising it. I, for one, really like it. I think it's diverse and unique and interesting, and leans into the better aspects of the band's modern, poppier elements without completely abandoning good heavy moments. I don't think I like this album as much as Posthuman Survival Horror a few years back, but they both have their appeal. Through Storms Ahead by As I Lay Dying. It's almost a shame all of the shit that's gone down with As I Lay Dying, because this album is actually really good. I didn't want to include it on the list itself, however, because most of the reason it is so good are the clean vocals. Seriously, they are much better than any past As I Lay Dying record, and the songwriting, which I think is largely separate from Tim. So yeah, rest in peace, As I Lay Dying. I would say you ended strong if it weren't entirely in spite of yourself. Number 5, Purge by Abbey Falls and Breakdown of Sanity. While not the most sophisticated song in the world, I really love the dynamic between Abbey Falls, who released one of my favorite 2022 releases, and Breakdown of Sanity, a long-time classic amongst deathcore. The way the new and the old is blended, and the way the band's soundscapes meld for this is super fun to me, albeit a tad repetitive if you listen to it too much. Number 4, Confession by Silverstein. Talk about possibly my favorite chorus of the year. What a gem this song is. Sonically, lyrically, Confession is the exact thing that I love about the genre that it folds into. Silverstein always manages to have some major sleeper hits for me, and this is an exceptional example. Number 3, Awaken by Breaking Benjamin. If you mix Dear Agony and Dark Before Dawn, my two favorite Breaking Benjamin albums, together, you end up with Awaken. Like, seriously, it's awesome. A lot of other people compare it to Ember, but I kind of disagree. Either way, if you're a fan of Breaking Benjamin, you'll be a fan of this song too. In fact, I think it's up there as one of their best ever. Number 2, And She Was Beautiful by Before I Turn. Technically, I think this might be my favorite song of the year, but the number 1 slot has been given to my most played song of the year for simplicity. For now, I also think And She Was Beautiful is one of Before I Turn's best songs. It is without a doubt one of their best riffs, and it is supremely catchy. The entire last, minute is one of the most addictive portions of any song I've ever personally listened to. I absolutely love this one, and if you like metalcore, you have to check this one out. Hell, check out all of Before I Turn's albums on top of it. Ignore the Imposter EP though, that one isn't good. Number 1, Levity by Up All Night. Let me read you the review I wrote for Music Board of this song. So, I know I'm biased when I write this short little single review, and I should disclose that. My brother wrote this song, but something about it is just so inexplicably special to me. Even if I know or love somebody who makes something, I'm not inherently going to like that thing, but this song is right up at the top of the ranks for me. My brother wrote this song and knows all of the lead guitar part by heart. Late in 2023, he was visiting for Christmas and wanted to show me a song. He set the backing track playing in his DAW, and just recorded the lead line in one take right there. And he replicated it over and over. I heard it with the amp and effects, I heard it without an amp and effects, just the raw electric guitar strings by themselves, and I heard it enough to air drum my own parts to it, as I am a drummer. My father, and me to a small degree, are the reason he finally decided to release this song to streaming platforms. It's genius. It has the perfect vibe, the perfect tone, sets the perfect mood. It knows how to be melancholic and joyous at once, in a tune that molds itself for the mood that you're in while listening. I've played this on repeat while commuting to work and back some days. I've played it for friends and other family who haven't heard him play it personally yet. I've shared it with a bunch of online buddies, one of whom saw this become his number 2 most played song on Spotify this year to join ranks with my number 1 spot. Before he sent me this song, my brother said to ignore the name Levity, as he couldn't think of the supposed right word for it. With all due respect, my man, shut up. Levity is the perfect name for this song. As I said at the start, I am biased because my brother wrote this, and I don't really care. I think Levity is right on the verge of perfection, with my only criticism being that the mixing of the higher octave lead right at the very end is too quiet for part of the phrase so as to barely be there, a minor blemish upon an otherwise perfect song that I only really noticed after listening to it over a dozen times. My brother should be working on another song. At least he sent me a clip of something that sounded awesome and which both emulated and diverged from the style of Levity, and I hope he finishes that soon because I want another song like this in my life. Congrats on winning my Song of the Year, little bro. You cooked with this one. And as a special little side note for this video, I actually used this song to open and close all of my Book Binge videos, the flagship series on my main channel, from episode 208 onwards. Number 20, Lore by The Narrator. Somehow I missed that this record even existed until literally the first day of 2025. I'm a few months late to it, oops, but I found myself really enjoying Lore. I don't think I've listened to The Narrator before, but I have to say that Lore was a great starting point. It's modern metalcore in a nutshell and doesn't wear out its welcome, which is frankly more than enough for me. I definitely need to spin this a few more times and then check out whatever else these guys might have done. Given more time, I could have seen this reaching higher on the list. Number 19, From Zero by Linkin Park. For as much controversy as has arisen about the new era of Linkin Park, and about how much I feel or care about that, check out my review I did of the album shortly after it released in November. I really liked From Zero personally, and welcome seeing more from Linkin Park in the future. In fact, I was going to go to their Denver show, the closest to me, come this September, but some major changes at my job, such as my boss retiring and my taking her spot, literally that same week makes it an impossibility that I'm quite saddened by. By the way, The Emptiness Machine was my vote for Song of the Year for the Nick Nocturnal Awards. Number 18, Make Them Suffer by Make Them Suffer. I will certainly catch flack for my opinion that How to Survive a Funeral was one of the most overrated albums of the year it came out. In general, I struggled to click with Make Them Suffer like everyone else, but this self-titled record has come the closest for me. It has at least one of my favorite songs of the year. I really enjoyed the songwriting overall despite a couple of duds, and quite frankly, Alex Reid is a much better and more interesting vocalist than Booka was, not least because she does both cleans and uncleans, and the band lets her shine in both settings. Number 17, The Nothing That Is by Fit for an Autopsy. I've already discussed this album on the channel under a discography ranking I made for Fit for an Autopsy. I stated in that video that The Nothing That Is a little disappointing to me, or at least something about it doesn't click for me like previous albums from the band. Of course, that's not to say that it's bad, because I do quite like it. I just hold out hope that I'll like it more with time, like what happened with Oh What the Future Holds. Number 16, End Time Signals by Dark Tranquillity. As opposed to Shining by Swallow the Sun, Dark Tranquillity's most recent release is a little heavier for Melodeath and more akin to the classic sound of the genre. It is one of my favorite albums within said genre and has continued to open my eyes to the fact I need to explore melodic death metal so much more than I have so far. I seriously recommend this one. Number 15, Leap of Death by Left to Suffer. You may remember that Left to Suffer also made my list last year, though for different reasons. In 2023, Left to Suffer dropped a blisteringly heavy deathcore through and through album which had a vibe that just clicked for me. This year, a similar thing happened, except Leap of Death is nowhere near as constantly heavy. To offset the heavy, there are plenty of softer moments and clean vocals, and I think Left to Suffer incorporated these elements quite well. I also love that they released such starkly different yet related albums in back-to-back years. Number 14, The Devil Exists by Before I Turn. While very nearly eligible to be considered an EP, The Devil Exists was originally going to be a longer, fuller release before Alex finally realized it made more sense as a thematically driven piece rather than a story driven piece like the two prior BIT albums. As such, the title depicts the idea that each track tries to explore in different ways. My review I did early in 2024 talks more about that. I really like this record, and specifically adore a couple of the tracks, though the full release doesn't quite live up to either Claustrophobic or Lovelorn. The continuation of the story of those albums and whatever Alex does next is something I'm really looking forward to in the new year. Number 13, Living in the Static by Live a Lie. A very late release for the year, to the point that many people might miss it entirely for their own lists. I've heard the name Live a Lie a bit over 2024, founded by Ocean's 8 Alaska's original vocalist. Living in the Static is one of the more unique core or core-adjacent releases I've heard in all of the 2020s so far. Its highs are amongst the highest of the entire year, and the whole record is super solid. The only reason I don't place it higher is because of avoiding recency bias. I do believe this will become a general favorite the longer I spend with it. Number 12, Excessive Guilt by Throne. I am not a huge hardcore person, but man did Throne knock it out of the park with this one. Barely an album, 10 songs, but like barely over 20 minutes, it is a pounding and aggressive album that refuses to outstay its welcome through such short tracks. If you have any amount of attraction to hardcore, and even if you don't, like I said, I'm not huge on it either, this album is a must listen. Number 11, Opera by Fleshgod Apocalypse. One of the handful of biggest surprises for my 2024 list, the new Fleshgod Apocalypse came at a good, or perhaps awful, time for me, depending on how you interpret the context. My grandfather died in, what was it? Was it early October? I think it was like October 10th or something like that. That's a number I feel like I should remember, but nonetheless, I realized shortly after the funeral that this album came out. I decided to give it a listen while I was kind of rolling through the early grief a bit, and something about opera just molded with that perfectly. I think I will always associate this record with that time in life as a result, and I found I actually really loved it, even though straight death metal often misses for me. Maybe the symphonic elements are what did it here, but I don't know. Either way, I'm almost second-guessing keeping opera out of the top 10, so I'll move on before it becomes a problem. Number 5, Bleeding Star by Kingdom of Giants. Bleeding Star is a solid EP, but the main reason it makes the list for me is that it introduced me to Kingdom of Giants. Of course, I've been aware of them for years, but never actually listened to them. After liking this EP, I went back and listened to their previous album and realized I have truly been sleeping on these guys. I have now corrected my reticle for the future to follow their work better. Number 4, The Poetic Edda by Synestia and Disembodied Tyrant. The EP that probably took the core community by storm the most was definitely The Poetic Edda, retaining a lot of what has made Lorna Shore blow up the past half-decade, but incorporated even crazier moments of production and borderline Thali moments made this a standout, though I confess I think it runs a little longer than I'd like. Solid, but I don't keep this on repeat. Number 3, Pain Processing by Victims. I think Pain Processing is technically listed as an album, but given low track count and runtime, I'm including it here instead as, I guess, a technicality. I apologize sincerely if that bothers anyone. Either way, I really like this release. It's not going to be an attractive comparison for many, but if you imagine like self-titled era Slipknot writing something closer approaching metalcore than nu metal, Victims aren't too far off from doing that very thing. If you happen to be suffering from an ugly breakup or something like that as well, let's just say this thing's gonna smack you like a brick. Number 2, The Tower, Part 1 by Disembodied Tyrant. Oh hey, it's Disembodied Tyrant again. Yep, The Tower Part 1 also made a splash, much like this artist's earlier joint EP did, albeit to a lesser degree, and I like this one better. It's more sonically interesting to me, and the blend of various metal sounds and elements make it feel a bit more unique too. Plus, it's short enough that I find myself asking for part 2 now, compared to wishing the Poetic Edda was a minute or two shorter per track. Number 1, Heaven Let Them Die by Counterparts. This is one of my biggest surprises of the year because I have historically not loved Counterparts. That's not to say I ever thought they were bad, but something about their sound previously hasn't worked for me. Hardcore often isn't my thing anyway, melodic or not, and I don't particularly love Counterparts' clean vocals, so their 2022 album specifically was most certainly not one of my favorites. Heaven Let Them Die, however, took the heavier side of the band's sound that I do actually kind of like, and kept it going the entire way through, and apparently I was super into that. Number 10, From the New World by Alt. Alt's recent album was also a pleasant surprise for me. I'm not huge on Thal, to the point that one of the biggest artists doing that kind of thing right now, Humanity's Last Breath, merely made a passing mention in my 2023 Album of the Year list, and mostly because I thought it was decent, though really overlong. In contrast, From the New World is a much shorter record that I enjoy largely through and through and have actually played several times the last month or two. Thal may not be my thing, but Alt's approach to it is, at least for this go-around. Number 9, The Cycles of Trying to Cope by Like Moths to Flames. A part of me feels like I'm snubbing Like Moths to Flames here, since I've gone on record saying that all of their 2020s material is amongst some of my favorite metalcore, and music in general, ever. Something about their approach to songwriting just clicks so perfectly for me, but The Cycles of Trying to Cope might be my least favorite of the 3 major releases they've put out this year. More than 3 releases if you count the various standalone double singles as their own separate experiences, as I do. I really like this album though, even if it is a slight step down in my eyes. Number 8, Phenomena 2 by Within the Ruins. Well, would you look at that, another surprising entry. 2020's Black Heart was a record that I struggled with for reasons that I could scarcely explain at the time, and though I had not written off Within the Ruins entirely as a result, I was dubious going into Phenomena 2, despite enjoying the couple of singles a good bit. Turns out my suspicion was totally unwarranted. The instrumentality on this record is second almost to none, and I found myself thoroughly impressed. More than just being a good album, I was having an outright fun time listening to this one, more so than usual these days. As such, it makes one of my most memorable listening experiences of the year. Number 7, Clancy by 21 Pilots. Another very memorable album experience for me was Clancy by 21 Pilots. I did a discography ranking for these guys earlier in the year, so if you want to know more, go check that out. But the long story short is that I didn't like this record much the first go-around, but upon revisiting, or just straight up visiting, the rest of the band's discography and coming back around to this one, I discovered I actually really like it. Routines in the Night alone make this worthy of being somewhere on the list. Like, come on. I don't listen to T.O.P. much, but I'm glad I did a deep dive after this record came out. Number 6, There Is Beauty in Letting Go by Vicious Rain. Now, back to core. For a debut, There Is Beauty in Letting Go is a hugely successful release. Hell, these guys more or less started blowing up from their first few singles. As they continued to release more gearing up for the album, I just got more and more excited. I knew this one would be something special, and Vicious Rain absolutely didn't disappoint. The last couple tracks in particular wrap up the whole record spectacularly and make it one really worth checking out. Number 5, Negative Spaces by Poppy. And now for my, by far, most surprising inclusion here, Poppy. I'm not huge on Poppy. I won't lie. In fairness, I haven't actually listened to very much of her past material, but what I have listened to, I don't really enjoy. Negative Spaces completely turned my sentiment about her around. I came into this album expecting it to be mediocre at best, not least because I was underwhelmed by a couple of the single choices, but boy was I wrong. After the first spin, I was like, okay, this is definitely an honorable mention. And then after the second spin, I was like, okay, maybe this is actually top 10 worthy. I didn't think it'd be top 5 worthy, but here we are. Judge me all you want, but this record is great. Although, ironically, the heavier tracks are broadly my least favorite ones here. That's definitely pretty atypical. Number 4, Digital Apocalypse by A Night in Texas. For something a little heavier, we have the first of 2 tied deathcore releases for me this year. Basically, number 4 and number 3 are interchangeable, so don't take the fact I'm talking one over the other impact the list too much. Either way, I love Digital Apocalypse. I'm generally more of a metalcore guy than a deathcore guy, but this album proves that when deathcore, especially when something resembling a more classic deathcore sound, is done right, it is truly spectacular. It's not even like Digital Apocalypse is the most diverse or innovative record, it's just so solidly executed that I love it. Death Protocol might just be my favorite deathcore song of the year, too. Number 3, Living Chaos by Oceano. For a distinctly more modern deathcore record, Oceano takes the cake. Again, this album is tied with A Night in Texas. Anyway, I haven't explored Oceano's discography much yet, and this album made me realize just how much I've obviously been missing out. It is seriously such a gem of a record, and the drama surrounding the band's touring and Adam's leaving disheartens me so much. I seriously think this is a phenomenal album, and Oceano being done touring this year and Adam, the vocalist, already being gone, low-key depresses me. I would have loved to get another album or two from Oceano to continue to transform and define the genre if Living Chaos is any relevant testament to the band's quality. Number 2, With or Without by If I Were You. As it turns out, one of the very first bangers of the year was one of the best. If you want to know more specifically my thoughts on With or Without, I did a review of it right about a year ago at the time of this video's release. While at first, With or Without sounds like any other 2020s era metalcore album, it is in fact If I Were You's best. It has so many great songs that I still think about relatively constantly, and overall it just jives with my tastes completely. I played this album enough that I believe every song ended up in my top 25 songs of the year on Spotify for 2024. If you've missed this one, I highly recommend you circle back around to it. I should also point out that much like how rankings 4 and 3 are basically interchangeable, despite being thoroughly distinct kinds of deathcore, this spot and the number 1 slot could be considered some form of interchangeable as well, albeit in a metalcore context instead. It's really quite cool how that turned out, if you ask me. Number 1, Searching for Solace by The Ghost Inside. Let's just say there's a reason I'm mad I neither had nor forced the time to write a dedicated review on this channel for Searching for Solace. The working title I had going for that video was The Ghost Inside Searching for Solace is the essence of metalcore, and I truly believe that. Everything that I love about the genre is in here. Great catchy songs with addictive and singable choruses, heavy songs that never let up on the uncleans, featuring riffs that might as well be breakdowns and breakdowns that get even more crushing, songs that start soft and turn into epic power ballads, lyrics that are in one moment introspective and at another beautiful. The entirety of Searching for Solace is just exactly what I love about metalcore. Despite the momentous occasion that was the Ghost Inside's 2020 comeback with Aftermath and their self-titled record, I think Searching for Solace might just be the album they were born to write, and I say that without thinking it does much to innovate on the formula. Much like A Night in Texas, the Ghost Inside impressed more with their sheer understanding and execution of something that I love more than trying to do something new. Sometimes all you need is old reliable in a fresh skin, and that's exactly what this is. I probably did a piss-poor job of explaining why, but Searching for Solace is my 2024 album of the year. Maybe I should have held back. But then again, maybe I didn't need to hold back. I now understand why what I said about 2024 in the introduction was correct. Namely, I don't actively recall it anywhere near as fondly as last year. In trying to compose and organize this list, I finally realized why that is. I don't recall 2024's music fondly because it simply was not super memorable compared to years past. Now, don't take that the wrong way, as I merely mean it as a comparison to 2021 through 2023, when my top music picks, my favorite albums, were often clear as day, or at least what was and wasn't making the list was obvious in my mind even if the exact ordering was sometimes a toss-up. And that's just it, right? My 2024 list was the least obvious to me of any album of the year ranking I think I've ever consciously composed since all the way back in 2018 or so, when my personal metal exploration journey really kicked off. Even 2017 can be included in this, though I'm fairly certain I didn't actually compose an album of the year list that year. In essence, 2024 was a supremely consistent year for music quality in terms of what I listened to. I enjoyed a lot and enjoyed nearly all of it to a similar enough degree so as to be inclined to include 30 albums on this list, plus 8 EPs and 8 singles besides. That's a lot. This is, after all, a top 20 rather than previous years' top 10s. But as I made cuts and rearranged all of these records in December and January, finalizing what I thought of the year's releases, I discovered that determining what was top 10 and what was honorable mention specifically was incredibly difficult, hence the expansion to top 20. I just kept moving certain records back and forth, unsure of myself, and weirdly, my lack of assurance wasn't because all 30-ish albums I chose for this video stood out significantly, but because nearly none of them did. It's somewhat hard to explain, but I hope you get the meaning. While there was a lot of great stuff this year, shockingly little of it was so obviously top 10 worthy that only my top 4 albums made the top 10 at all in my mind before composing the list. The other top 5 appearance I knew was at least honorable mention, but I wasn't even sure about top 10, let alone the number 5 spot following a second listen. All this to say that my ranking this year is kind of weird. I'm not sure how much I stand behind it in a way. Maybe I in fact should have held back and forced myself to consider my picks more carefully. As I said, a ton of these records flip-flopped from section to section through the entire composition process of the ranking, and maybe I'd feel more convicted if I had allowed myself to stress about the picks more. Maybe the reason I'm struggling comes simply down to context of 2023. Last year had so many releases that were so incredible that I knew my number 1 picks, yes, I said picks with an S, for context, go watch that video if you haven't, plus most of the rest of the top 10 going in. The order had to be figured out and the other honorable mentions and whatnot sorted, but I knew most of the list inherently. This year I did not, and that means much of it really feels wrong to me. Oh well, ain't nothing I'm gonna do about it now, but I can safely say I learned a lesson that I hope to apply in 2025. If another season of consistently great but few standouts happens this year, well, I'll shorten the list and do it differently, but first we gotta get through the year. So long 2024, I appreciated your consistency, but I think I want a few more all-time favorites now. By the way, if you made it all the way through the video and have similar tastes in music as me, that being largely metalcore and deathcore with a bit of prog metal and alt metal, and maybe some occasional miscellaneous stuff thrown in for good measure, I think you'll feel right at home with my new weekly series on this very channel called Music Mania, where I'll go over new releases I'm paying attention to, rating/reviewing it all, and discussing what other not brand new stuff I've been listening to each week besides. It'll be a fun, chill time, not scripted but on camera for that series, and you can always shout out some of your favorite new releases for me to check out in time, or remind me of releases from artists that I somehow miss or forget about occasionally too. Thanks for watching this ranking. Sincerely, I appreciate it a lot, especially after how well some of my recent scripted music content has gone down. If you liked this video, check out the other 2 parts of this year-end content for the channel. Last week's video ranking the movies that I watched in 2024, linked in the end card of this video, and next week's video ranking the games I played in 2024, which will also be linked upon availability. Be sure to stick around for weekly Let's Play videos on Fridays, Music Mania videos on Mondays, and the occasional scripted content, usually album reviews or discography rankings, on Wednesdays when they happen. Thank you again for watching. I hope to see you all next week.